Most people think construction crews build things, but some jobs exist for a different reason. Some jobs are meant to seal things underground. My name is Mason Hale, and for most of my life, I've worked construction in the hills of eastern Kentucky. Not residential framing, not roofing, not the kind of jobs people picture when they hear the word construction. I mean access roads carved into mountainsides, retaining walls holding back unstable cuts, drainage systems built through dead mining towns where half the roads don't appear on GPS anymore. Concrete pads poured in valleys so remote the ready-mix trucks need escort vehicles just to get there without sliding off the road. The company I worked for specialized in difficult sites, old coal ground, sinkhole country, places where the earth had already been hollowed out long before we arrived. Most crews hated those contracts because everything about them fought back. Equipment sank unexpectedly, survey lines shifted after rainstorms, entire slopes moved overnight. You could spend a week cutting grade into a hillside only to come back Monday morning and find half the mountain sitting in your ditch. The pay was better than normal construction work, though. That's why men kept taking the jobs. That's also why a lot of them disappeared. Officially, eastern Kentucky is dangerous because of unstable terrain, abandoned mines, flooded shafts, bad roads, and old blasting damage from coal operations dating back generations. That explanation satisfies most people. It satisfied me too when I first started. Back then, I believed every strange thing underground had a logical explanation if you dug far enough into engineering reports and geological surveys. Then I started working with Frank Mercer. Frank was the foreman of our crew. Late 50s, thick shoulders, smoked too much, rarely raised his voice because he never had to. He'd spent almost 30 years doing excavation and stabilization work across Kentucky, West Virginia, and southern Ohio. Frank knew dirt better than anyone I've ever met. He could walk across a slope, kick the ground once with his boot, and tell you whether there was a buried void underneath. Most men on construction sites trust measurements. Frank trusted instincts, and the worst part was that his instincts were usually right. The rest of the crew was small. Ray Collins ran the dozer and loader equipment, quiet man, divorced twice, drank gas station coffee like it was medicine. Then there was Owen Pike. Owen was 23 and built like somebody who had never been hurt badly enough to fear consequences yet. Fast worker, strong back, smart mouth. Every crew has one guy like that. The one who thinks experience is just old men being paranoid. And then there was me. I handled forms, grade checks, rebar layouts, equipment support, and whatever else needed doing. At the time, I'd been working construction for almost 11 years, long enough to stop romanticizing hard labor, long enough to know every job site has its own personality. Some places feel stable, some don't. The first thing Frank ever told me that truly bothered me happened during a road widening project outside Hazard. We were parked near the edge of an old strip mining cut, waiting for a fuel delivery. Fog hung low across the valley below us, and somewhere in the distance I could hear blasting echoes rolling through the mountains. Frank stood beside the truck, drinking coffee from a dented thermos. Out of nowhere, he said, "If the ground starts answering, stop working." I remember laughing a little because I thought he meant echoes off the hills. Frank didn't laugh. He just stared down into the fog. "You'll know the difference when it happens," he said. At the time, I thought it was just another old construction superstition. Every trade has them. Roofers have sayings about wind. Loggers have sayings about trees. Miners have entire lists of things they refuse to say underground. I figured this was the same kind of thing. It wasn't. Rule 1, if the rebar hums, pull it out. The first time I heard it, we were building a reinforced creek crossing for county maintenance trucks about 40 minutes south of Jackson. Simple job on paper. Excavate the creek bed, drill footing positions, tie steel cages, pour concrete, install guardrails, leave. The creek itself had dried years earlier after runoff from old mining operations poisoned most of the surrounding watershed. All that remained was a shallow stone trench winding between steep hillsides covered in dead trees and scrub brush. Even in daylight, the place felt abandoned in the wrong way. No birds, no insects, just wind moving through dry branches. We started excavation around 7 that morning. Ray ran the backhoe while Owen and I checked footing depths with rods and tape. Frank walked the creek bed slowly, studying the exposed rock walls more than the actual work. Around noon, Owen started driving vertical rebar pins into the first footing trench. The steel went down normally at first. 3 feet, maybe 4, then it stopped suddenly. Owen raised the sledgehammer again. Frank looked up immediately. "Don't hit it again," he said. Owen rolled his eyes and swung anyway. The sound that came out of the ground didn't sound like metal striking rock. It sounded alive. The rebar vibrated in Owen's hands with a low humming noise that spread through the trench floor and into the creek bed around us. Ray shut down the backhoe engine. The entire site went quiet except for the hum. It wasn't loud, that was the worst part. It sounded distant, deep, like something far below us was resonating against the steel. Owen let go of the rod immediately. The humming continued by itself. Frank climbed into the trench beside me and crouched near the rebar. He didn't touch it. "Chain," he said quietly. Ray brought over a towing chain from the truck, while Frank kept staring at the steel rod like it was a snake waiting to strike. The dirt around the rebar slowly compressed inward, not collapsing, pulling, like the ground underneath was tightening around the metal. Then we heard it. A breath, long, wet, directly below us. Owen backed away first. I remember the exact expression on his face because it was the first time I ever saw him genuinely afraid. Frank wrapped the chain around the rod and hooked it to the backhoe bucket. "Lift slow," he told Ray. Ray eased the hydraulics upward. The steel resisted at first. Then it came free all at once with a thick, sucking noise that echoed through the creek bed. The bottom portion of the rebar was missing. Not broken, not bent, gone. The cut looked melted smooth, like the steel had been dissolved. Frank immediately ordered us to fill the footing trench with gravel. No more drilling, no concrete, nothing. We packed the equipment before sunset and left the site unfinished. The county engineer later blamed the shutdown on unstable subsurface voids caused by abandoned mining tunnels. Frank never argued with the report. That night, while we were fueling equipment at the yard, I finally asked him what had actually happened. Frank lit a cigarette before answering. "There are pockets underground that react to vibration," he said. "Gas pockets?" He shook his head. "No." He looked toward the dark hills beyond the yard lights. "Listener pockets." I laughed nervously. "What the hell does that mean?" Frank took a long drag from the cigarette. "It means something heard us knock." That was the first rule. If the rebar hums, pull it out. Immediately. Rule 2. If the gravel is white, don't spread it. 3 months later, we were cutting a private access road up toward a hunting cabin outside Pikeville. The hillside was steep enough that Ray had to bench cut the road one section at a time, while Owen and I cleared roots and loose shale from the grade line. Rain moved through constantly that week. Everything smelled wet. Mud coated the tracks on the dozer so thick it looked like clay armor. By Thursday morning, we finally reached the elevation where the owner wanted the first gravel base spread. A supplier delivered 3 dump loads of crushed limestone shortly after sunrise. At first, everything looked normal. Then Ray pushed the first bladeful across the road cut. The gravel underneath was pure white, not limestone white, not dusty gray, white like powdered bone. Frank stopped walking immediately. I watched him kneel beside the spread pile and run the material through his fingers. The expression on his face tightened. "Stop the dozer," he said. Ray shut the machine down. Owen grabbed a handful from the pile. "Looks like bad quarry stone." Frank shook his head slowly. "This isn't quarry stone." The closer we looked, the worse it became. Mixed through the gravel were tiny curved fragments. Thin, smooth, pale. Teeth, hundreds of them. Some looked human, some didn't. Frank ordered us to tarp the pile immediately. No spreading, No compaction, just cover it. That evening the fog rolled in heavy through the trees. Visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet around the trucks. We stayed late trying to secure drainage before another storm moved through. Around dusk, I heard movement near the tarp. At first, I assumed an animal had climbed onto the pile. Then the tarp lifted upward from underneath. Something was moving below the gravel, not burrowing, shifting, like several long shapes sliding together beneath the surface. Owen stepped toward it instinctively. Frank grabbed his shoulder so hard I heard the fabric tear. "No!" The tarp rose again. This time I saw outlines underneath. Arms. Thin ones. Too many. They pressed upward briefly before sinking back into the pile. The gravel itself began sliding slowly toward the tree line without making a sound, not collapsing. Moving, like it was being pulled from below. None of us spoke. We just watched. By the next morning, the entire gravel pile was gone. Only the tarp remained behind, folded neatly at the edge of the road cut. No drag marks, no spilled stone, nothing. Frank stood there a long time before speaking. "If the gravel is white," he said quietly, "don't spread it." I asked him where it came from. He looked out into the fog-covered hills. Somebody ground down the wrong thing. Rule 3. If the flags move overnight, don't correct the line. The retaining wall contract near Harlan County looked routine. Old hillside slipping toward a county road. Build a reinforced wall. Install drainage. Anchor the slope. Done. The survey crew marked the footer trench before leaving for the evening. Straight line, 32 feet long, blue flags every 6 feet. The next morning, every flag had moved, exactly 6 feet west. Same spacing, same alignment, perfectly straight, just shifted. Owen blamed teenagers, Ray blamed wind. Frank stared at the line for nearly a minute without speaking. Finally he said, "We dig the new line." The engineer argued over the phone for almost 20 minutes. Frank never changed his answer. "We're not digging the original cut." Eventually the engineer gave in. Ray started trenching the shifted line while I checked depth behind him. Around 4 feet down, the bucket exposed black stone. Flat, smooth, artificial. The slab ran directly beneath where the original trench would have gone, not the new line, the old one. If we had followed the first survey marks, we would have cut straight through it. There were markings carved into the surface. Not symbols exactly. More like diagrams, circles connected by straight channels. Measurements, grid systems, drainage-like layouts spreading outward underground. Then something knocked from beneath the slab. 3 slow impacts, deliberate. The sound vibrated through my boots. A second knock answered farther down the trench. Then another. Like multiple things below the stone were locating us through sound. Owen climbed out of the trench immediately. Frank never took his eyes off the slab. "Cover it back up," he said. "No photos, no measurements, nothing." We buried the stone and finished the retaining wall along the shifted line. 2 weeks later, another contractor arrived to install drainage pipe along the original survey path. Their excavator punched through the slab around noon. The operator disappeared with the machine. The hole closed behind him when the trench wall collapsed. They recovered the excavator 3 days later, almost 60 feet downslope. The cab was empty. The county called it a sinkhole fatality caused by abandoned mining voids. Frank folded the newspaper clipping once and tossed it into the trash. Then he looked at me and said, "If the flags move overnight, don't correct the line. Rule 4. If water runs uphill, leave before the lights fail." That rule saved every one of us. The site sat deep in a narrow valley where 3 abandoned mining roads intersected near an old pump station that hadn't operated since the 70s. The company wanted a concrete utility pad installed there for communications equipment. The entire valley felt dead. No animal noise, no flowing water, nothing except distant dripping sounds echoing somewhere beneath the ground. Even Ray noticed it. "Place feels sealed," he muttered while unloading forms. We worked through most of the afternoon setting anchors and leveling the grade. Cloud cover rolled in early, turning the valley dark long before sunset. That was when Owen pointed toward the drainage ditch. Water was moving uphill. At first, it looked like an illusion. Then, I saw pebbles shifting backward against the slope. Thin streams crawled slowly toward the pad we were building. Frank dropped his tape measure immediately. "Pack the tools," Owen protested. The concrete truck was already on the way. Leaving would cost the company thousands. Frank didn't care. "We leave now." The portable generator lights flickered once, then again. A vibration rolled beneath the ground, deep enough that the forms rattled. The uphill moving water darkened until it looked almost black under the floodlights. Thin strands rose upward from the ditch. Not splashes, threads like roots made of liquid. One touched a steel anchor stake. Rust spread across the metal instantly. Another touched Owen's shovel blade. The steel softened and bent sideways like warm plastic. That finally convinced him. Ray started the dozer while Frank and I loaded equipment into the trucks as fast as we could. The lights began shutting off around the valley one at a time, not randomly, sequentially, moving closer, like something underground was traveling beneath them. As we drove out, I looked back through the rear window. The black water had gathered inside the forms, perfectly still. Then the center opened slowly, not like a splash, like an eyelid pulling apart. I saw depth under the surface, way too much depth. Frank noticed me staring. "Don't look back at it," he said. I didn't ask questions after that. I already knew the rule. If water runs uphill, leave before the lights fail. Rule 5, if the concrete won't set, don't pour more. The last rule was the one that ended our crew. Officially, it happened during a state-funded stabilization project near an abandoned rail tunnel outside Black Mountain. The tunnel had been sealed sometime in the 1940s after a collapse killed several workers. At least that was the public story. Our contract involved pouring a reinforced retaining cap along the slope above the old tunnel entrance to prevent further erosion. Simple enough. Except somebody had already been there before us. When we arrived, a narrow inspection trench had already been cut into the hillside and covered with thick plywood sheets bolted into place. Frank saw the bolts and immediately went quiet. That should have been our warning. But the contract paid triple rate. Nobody walked away from triple rate jobs. Not in our line of work. We started pouring just after 9 that morning. The first concrete truck emptied into the forms normally. Gray slurry, standard mix. Everything looked fine. Until the concrete stopped behaving like concrete. It didn't level, it shifted, slowly pulling inward toward the center of the formwork, like something underneath was drawing it down. By noon, the pour still hadn't begun setting. Ray pushed a steel rod into the surface. When he pulled it back out, steam rose from the tip. Frank told him not to touch it again. Then the concrete moved. The entire surface inflated upward slightly before settling back down. A bubble opened near the center. Inside, it was darkness, not shadow, depth, far deeper than the form itself should have allowed. Frank backed away immediately. "Everybody move." The second concrete truck arrived then. The driver climbed out asking where we wanted the load dumped. Frank shouted, "Nowhere." The driver looked confused. Then the forms cracked inward. Wet concrete folded down into itself like collapsing flesh, opening a circular hole near the center of the pour. Warm air rushed out. It smelled metallic, like hot rain hitting railroad tracks. Then the voices started. Not words at first, just overlapping sounds trying to become language. Dozens of them, some close, some distant. Owen stepped toward the hole automatically. Frank hit him in the chest hard enough to knock him backward. "Do not answer them." One voice rose above the others. Ray turned pale immediately. The voice belonged to his ex-wife, dead 6 years. It spoke his name from underneath the concrete. Ray stumbled backwards so fast he fell against the truck bumper. Then more voices came. Parents, brothers, children, people we knew, every one of them coming from below the pour. Something pushed upward beneath the concrete surface. A face appeared, then another. Not real faces, impressions, like bodies trapped under stretched fabric trying to break through. Hands formed next, dozens of them pressing upward from underneath the wet concrete. The driver ran first, jumped into his truck and nearly backed off the access road trying to leave. Frank grabbed dry cement bags and started dumping powder directly into the hole. "Everything," he shouted. We moved because Frank moved, not because we understood anything. We dumped gravel, dry mix, bentonite, scrap steel, broken block, leftover anchor rods, anything heavy enough to fill space. The voices became desperate, angry, then pleading. One voice called my name using my brother's voice. My brother was alive 3 states away. That somehow made it worse. "Mason," it said softly. "Don't leave me down here." I almost answered. Frank slapped me hard enough to spin me sideways. "Not your brother!" The concrete kept pulling material downward. It wanted mass, weight, structure. It felt like we weren't sealing a hole. We were feeding one. The surface bulged upward again. More faces pressed through, hundreds this time, all trying to rise through the wet concrete. Frank climbed into the dozer and shoved half the aggregate pile directly onto the forms. The wooden frames collapsed inward. Concrete, gravel, and broken timber crashed into the opening. For a moment, the ground shook hard enough to knock tools off the truck beds. Then everything stopped. The voices vanished instantly. The silence afterward felt enormous. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Steam rose slowly from the buried pour while evening settled over the hills. Frank stayed inside the dozer for almost 10 minutes before climbing down. He looked exhausted, older, like something underneath that hillside had recognized him personally. That night, while we packed equipment under portable floodlights, Frank finally gave us the last rule. "If the concrete won't set," he said quietly, "don't pour more." He looked back toward the buried forms. "Kill the pour, bury it dry." We never returned to that site. A different contractor finished the project later under state supervision. From what I heard, they poured nearly 4 feet of reinforced concrete across the entire hillside above the tunnel entrance. Not a retaining wall, a cap, a permanent seal. Nobody explained why that much concrete was necessary for erosion control. But by then, I had stopped expecting honest explanations. That's how those jobs work. The reports always sound boring enough to kill curiosity. Unstable soil, voids, drainage failures, improper curing, material defects. Those phrases exist because people stop asking questions once something sounds technical. But I know what we found out there. I know certain ground reacts when disturbed. I know some underground spaces are not empty. I know survey lines move for reasons that have nothing to do with weather. And I know there are places where construction crews are not building things. We are sealing them, holding them shut, weighting them down before something underneath figures out how to rise through the cracks. Frank retired less than a year after the tunnel job. Ray moved north and stopped heavy equipment work entirely. Owen quit construction. Last I heard, he worked nights stocking shelves at a warehouse outside Lexington. Me? I stayed. Maybe because construction is the only thing I know. Or maybe because after enough years working remote ground, normal places stop feeling trustworthy. These days, whenever I walk onto a site, I watch everything carefully. The sound steel makes underground, the direction water moves, the color of gravel, the way concrete settles. Young workers think I'm paranoid. That's fine. Paranoid workers survive longer in old coal country, especially in places full of sealed tunnels, buried caps, forgotten shafts, and survey maps the state doesn't release publicly anymore. People think construction is about creating things. Most of the time, it is. But sometimes the real job is containment. Sometimes concrete exists for the same reason prison walls do. And if you ever work a remote site where the foreman suddenly tells you to stop digging, leave equipment behind, or bury a pour before it cures properly, listen to him. Because some holes are not accidents. Some tunnels were sealed for reasons older than the companies paying to reopen them. And some things underneath the mountains are still trying to find a way back to the surface. They just need another crew willing to dig deep enough to let them through.